Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill. The philosophy that changed the world. The night that changed everything. It is the year 1908. In a wood-paneled office in Pittsburgh, two men sit across from one another. One is among the wealthiest human beings who has ever walked the earth. The other is a young, unknown journalist, 25 years old, with little money, no particular fame, and no certain future. The wealthy man is Andrew Carnegie, the young journalist is Napoleon Hill. And in this single meeting, something is about to be transferred, not money, not land, not stock certificates, but something far more powerful, an idea. Carnegie leans forward. He has been studying Hill, sizing him up the way only a man who has built an empire from nothing knows how to do. And then he says something that will alter the trajectory of not just Napoleon Hill's life, but the lives of millions of people not yet born. He tells Hill that there exists a secret, a principle, or rather a philosophy, that lies at the root of every great fortune, every meaningful achievement, every lasting legacy that humanity has ever produced. And then Carnegie does something unexpected. He does not tell Hill what the secret is. Instead, he issues a challenge. He asks Hill if he is willing to dedicate the next 20 years of his life to interviewing the most successful people in America, to searching, studying, distilling, until he discovers the secret for himself. Carnegie gave Hill no money for this endeavor, no guarantee of success. Only introductions to some of the greatest minds of the era: Henry Ford, Thomas Edison, Theodore Roosevelt, John D. Rockefeller, Wilbur Wright. Napoleon Hill said yes. And 29 years later, in 1937, he published what he found. He called it Think and Grow Rich. Welcome to Mindful Books. Today, we are not simply reviewing a self-help classic. We are stepping into a philosophy, a living, breathing architecture of thought that has shaped presidents, entrepreneurs, artists, and visionaries across nearly a century. We are going to examine 5 core pillars from this remarkable work and ask the question that matters most in our age. Do these principles still hold? I believe the answer will surprise you.
Desire, the starting point of all achievement. Napoleon Hill opens his masterwork not with a strategy, not with a financial formula, but with a question about hunger. Not the hunger of the body, the hunger of the soul. He calls it the burning desire. And he is very precise about what that means, because desire, in Hill's framework, is not a wish. It is not a daydream. It is not the passive wanting that most of us mistake for ambition. A burning desire is an obsession. It is the kind of commitment that refuses to negotiate with doubt. It is the force that rises before sunrise and doesn't sleep until the work is done. Hill opens with the story of Edwin C. Barnes, a young man who arrived at Thomas Edison's laboratory in New Jersey, penniless, with nothing but the absolute, unshakable conviction that he would become Edison's business partner. Not an employee, a partner. He started as a janitor. He waited. He studied. He made himself indispensable. And years later, when Edison introduced a new invention, the Ediphone, and no one on his sales team believed in it, Barnes stepped forward. He sold it. He succeeded where others dismissed it, and Edison made him his partner. The fortune Barnes accumulated was secondary to the principle Hill wanted us to see. Barnes did not hope to become Edison's partner. He made it his definite chief aim, and he refused to consider any outcome other than success. Whatever the mind of man can conceive and believe, it can achieve. Here is what Hill is really asking us. Do you have a definite chief aim? Not a vague aspiration, not a someday maybe. A specific, clearly articulated purpose, something you can write down, something you can feel, toward which every thought and every action is consciously directed. Because the architecture of every great life, Hill argues, begins here, in the quality of your desire.
Faith.
the eternal bridge between thought and reality. The second pillar is perhaps the most misunderstood and the most frequently dismissed by modern, analytically minded readers. Hill calls it faith, but he is not speaking of religious faith, though the resonance is unmistakable. He is speaking of something he defines with remarkable precision. Faith is a state of mind which may be induced or created by affirmation or repeated instructions to the subconscious mind. In other words, faith is not inherited, it is not a gift from the universe, it is a practice, a discipline, something you deliberately cultivate through the conscious repetition of belief. Hill was, in many ways, decades ahead of what we now understand about neuroplasticity, the brain's capacity to rewire itself based on repeated thought and behavior. He did not have access to functional MRI machines or cognitive science journals, but he had observed, across hundreds of interviews with the most successful people of his age, a single consistent pattern. They believed before the evidence arrived. Henry Ford believed he could build a car for every American family at a time when such a thing was considered the fantasy of a madman. Thomas Edison believed in the incandescent light bulb through 10,000 failed experiments. The Wright brothers believed human flight was possible, while most of the scientific establishment believed it was not. Faith, in Hill's framework, is not the absence of doubt. It is the decision to act in spite of doubt, while simultaneously conditioning the mind to expect success. Faith is the head chemist of the mind. When faith is blended with the vibration of thought, the subconscious mind instantly picks up the vibration, translates it into its spiritual equivalent, and transmits it to infinite intelligence. Hill prescribes a practice. Write down your desire. Write down the exact thing you intend to achieve and the exact date by which you intend to achieve it. Read it aloud twice daily, once when you wake, once before you sleep. And as you read it, see yourself already in possession of it. We might call this visualization today. Sports psychologists call it mental rehearsal. Neuroscientists call it priming the reticular activating system. Hill simply called it faith in action. Specialized knowledge. Why what you know matters less than what you do with it. Here is a thought that unsettles most educated people. General knowledge, the kind awarded by universities, accumulated in libraries, catalogued in encyclopedias, has almost no direct value in the creation of wealth or achievement. That is Napoleon Hill's position, and it is a radical one. He is quick to clarify. He is not dismissing education. He is redefining what useful education actually means. Henry Ford, Hill reminds us, had almost no formal schooling. He was once called ignorant on the witness stand during a libel trial, and Ford responded, in effect, that while he may not know the answers to every question off the top of his head, he could, within minutes, summon any specialist in the world to his telephone who did know the answers. That was Ford's education, not the accumulation of facts, the organization of knowledge through people and systems. Hill makes a distinction that is worth writing down. General knowledge is knowing. Specialized knowledge is applying. The person who reads voraciously but never acts on what they learn is, in Hill's view, no closer to achievement than the person who has read nothing. Knowledge only becomes power when it is organized into a definite plan of action and directed toward a specific end. An educated man is not, necessarily, one who has an abundance of general or specialized knowledge. An educated man is one who has so developed the faculties of his mind that he may acquire anything he wants. Ask yourself this question, not what do you know, but what are you doing with what you know? What single area of knowledge, applied with consistency and purpose, could become your greatest instrument of value? That is the question of specialized knowledge. Persistence, the sustained effort that turns desire into destiny. If desire is the ignition and faith is the fuel, then persistence is the engine that keeps running long after the initial excitement has faded, long after others have turned back, long after the path has become obscure. Hill dedicates an entire chapter to persistence, and he begins it with a story that stops you in your tracks. A man named R.U. Darby followed his uncle to the gold rush, staked a claim, and discovered ore. They invested everything, borrowed money from relatives, bought equipment, and dug. They struck a vein. Then, without warning, the vein disappeared. They dug further. Nothing. They gave up, sold their equipment for a fraction of its cost, and went home defeated. The man who bought their equipment hired a mining engineer. The engineer examined the geology and determined that the vein had not disappeared, it had simply shifted. 3 feet from where Darby and his uncle had stopped digging. 3 feet. Darby never forgot that lesson. He went on to become one of the most successful insurance salesmen in America, and every time a prospect said no, he remembered those 3 feet. Hill's message is not about blind stubbornness. It is about informed persistence, the capacity to adjust your method while never abandoning your goal, to remain in motion, to refuse the seduction of surrender. Before success comes in any man's life, he's sure to meet with much temporary defeat, and perhaps some failures. When defeat overtakes a man, the easiest and most logical thing to do is to quit. That is exactly what the majority of men do. The majority quit. Hill does not say this with contempt. He says it with the compassion of someone who studied failure as carefully as he studied success. Persistence, he notes, is a state of mind, and like faith, it can be cultivated. It is not a personality trait you are born with. It is a decision you return to each morning, each setback, each season of uncertainty. The mastermind. The alchemy of allied minds. The final pillar we examine today is one of the most profound and, in the digital age, perhaps the most immediately applicable concepts in the entire book. Napoleon Hill calls it the mastermind. He defines it as the coordination of knowledge and effort in a spirit of harmony between 2 or more people for the attainment of a definite purpose. And then he says something that borders on the metaphysical, that when 2 or more minds come together in harmony toward a common goal, a third mind is created, an invisible, intangible force that is greater than the sum of its parts. Hill was not speaking in metaphors. He had observed it in the real world. Andrew Carnegie's mastermind was his inner circle, a group of approximately 50 men whose collective knowledge, skills, and perspectives formed the invisible architecture of his empire. Carnegie openly admitted that he was not, personally, the most technically skilled person in his organization. What he possessed was the ability to assemble, align, and inspire the minds of those who were. Edison had his. Tesla, his laboratory colleagues, his investors. Ford had his. Every enduring enterprise, Hill concluded, was built not by one brilliant mind, but by an alliance of minds, each contributing their unique knowledge, each committed to the shared vision. No 2 minds ever come together without thereby creating a third, invisible, intangible force, which may be likened to a third mind. Who is in your mastermind? Not your social circle, not your followers. Your mastermind, the individuals who challenge your thinking, expand your vision, hold you accountable, and contribute knowledge and perspective you do not possess on your own. This is not a networking exercise. This is one of the most serious investments you will ever make. The mindful conclusion. Thoughts are things. 1937 in the digital age. Napoleon Hill begins Think and Grow Rich with 3 words that he intended as both a statement and a provocation. Thoughts are things. In 1937, that sentence must have seemed like mysticism to a good many readers. We live in an era of measurement and metrics, of cause and effect, of things that can be weighed and counted and verified. And yet, nearly 90 years later, the neuroscience of belief, the psychology of self-efficacy, the sociology of social networks, the economics of specialized knowledge, all of it seems to arrive quietly at the same conclusion that Hill articulated from his interviews and his observations. The inner world shapes the outer world. Consider what has changed since 1937 and what has not. The tools are different. The speed is different. The marketplace is global rather than national. Wealth today is created in lines of code, in intellectual property, in digital platforms, in the compounding architecture of online communities. But the principles, desire, faith, specialized knowledge, persistence, the mastermind, these are not products of the industrial age. They are not cultural artifacts. They are observations about human nature, about the relationship between what we think, what we believe, and what we ultimately create. The person who identifies a burning desire cultivates unshakable faith in its achievement, acquires the specialized knowledge required to bring it to life, persists through the inevitable storms, and surrounds themselves with a mastermind of aligned and capable people. That person will succeed, whether it is 1937 or today. There is one idea in this book that I return to again and again, and that I believe is more urgent now than at any point in history: the definiteness of purpose. We live in an age of infinite distraction, infinite content, infinite options, infinite noise. The greatest luxury of the digital age is also its greatest danger: the ability to consume endlessly without ever committing to anything. Hill's challenge to us, across nearly a century, is simply this: what do you want, specifically, deliberately, with every fiber of your being, and what are you willing to do to attain it? There is one quality which one must possess to win, and that is definiteness of purpose, the knowledge of what one wants, and a burning desire to possess it. Think and Grow Rich is not a book about money. It is a book about the interior landscape of achievement, about the relationship between consciousness and creation, between belief and reality, between the quiet determination of a single individual and the extraordinary life that determination can build. Read it slowly. Argue with it. Test its principles against your own life. You do not have to accept every word of it to find within its pages something that changes the way you see yourself and what you believe is possible for you. That, I think, is the most enduring secret Carnegie asked Napoleon Hill to uncover. Not a formula, not a hack, a philosophy of becoming. If this conversation has meant something to you, if something in these pages has stirred a thought or clarified a vision, I'd love to hear from you. In the comments below, I invite you to share your definite chief aim. Not a vague aspiration, but a real, written statement of what you are building, what you are working toward, what your burning desire is. There is something quietly powerful about writing it down, and there is something even more powerful about sharing it with a community of people who understand that the most important work any of us will ever do begins not in the world out there, but in the world within. If you found value here, consider subscribing to Mindful Books, a space where we take the great books seriously, read them slowly, and ask what they still have to teach us. Until next time, keep reading, keep thinking, keep becoming.